Welcome to day 4 of the Valentine series, and today we will be painting a cute heart padlock to go with the key we made on day 3. So we're starting out with a simple outline, and we're using a kneaded eraser to remove some of those harsh pencil lines. So the padlock matches the golden key that we made on day 3. We're going to keep the actual lock portion of the padlock gold. So we're starting off with a base layer of heavily diluted Hansa yellow light, and we're just going to fill in the top portion as well as the 3 little buttons and the outside of the keyhole. Working pretty quickly with wet on wet technique, we'll add a little bit of yellow ochre to our Hansa yellow light and work around an outline of everything we painted. We'll allow it to do its thing, do its own little bleed, but we'll also help it along with a damp brush to soften all those hard lines. Since the other yellow portions of the lock aren't as prominent, I'm only going to use this particular layer for the top part of the lock, and then I'll add some more yellow ochre and darken it a little bit more to do a heavier outline of all of the yellow parts. Again, we're going to keep our damp brush at the ready and soften all those harsh lines. You can have some fun here and add a few blooms and then move on to the other yellow portions of the lock. We're still going to do that light outline, we're still going to soften the edges, but we're going to darken the bottom right portion a little bit to create a little bit of dimension. We have reached the ugly stage where everything looks flat, there is no dimension, and it kind of looks cartoonish and totally 2D. But we're going to add another layer and it's going to start coming together. So we'll add a little bit more yellow ochre to that same mixture, and now we're creating more of shadow on all of the yellow parts that we painted. We're still softening the lines with a damp brush, but we're also putting in a little bit of a darker outline. Moving on to our next layer, this time we're going to add some raw umber to that mix that we've already made, and we're going to really deepen those shadows. Because we didn't dry the layers in between, when I start to add the darkest shadow, it starts to bleed into the golden part. This could be a wonderful thing about watercolor and a happy little accident, or it could be something that you don't like. It really is about preference. For me, I didn't like that it bled so much into the golden portion, so I just lifted it with a damp brush. After this, I completely dried it with the hairdryer, and then I did a clear wash with just the heart portion. I knew that I wanted the lock to be red, but I wanted the undertone to be pink. And using the Pyrrole Scarlet, the undertone tends to turn a little orange. So the base layer, I'm going to use Quinidone Rose and then dilute it. I'm going pretty heavy-handed on the left side of the lock, but I'm going to disperse color pretty evenly throughout the heart. I don't want this portion to be flat, so I'm happy to see brush strokes, I'm happy to see color pool in certain areas, and I want to see what each layer becomes so that it creates a little bit of texture and dimension. This part is really about preference. I'm choosing to lift some of the paint towards the middle and keep the left side of the heart darker. I'm still lifting here, but I'm leaving the left side a little bit darker, and I'm allowing for some spots to have more color than others. I want to completely dry it before adding the Pyrrole Scarlet. So this is just straight Pyrrole Scarlet, and I'm going a little heavy-handed with the outline, and then I'll fill it in. We can have a little fun here because the paper is so wet from the previous color. We can add some nice blooms with the Pyrrole Scarlet, and it really disperses well and causes a little bit of dimension at the bottom of the heart. I'm choosing to soften the edges and soften a little part of the edges of the blooms as well, but that's very much up to preference. We're going to start darkening on the inside of the rim of the heart to show a little bit of lift on the surface of this lock. We'll use our damp brush to soften the edges. It's time to go in with a darker color, so we have to completely dry it. And we're still having our Pyrrole Scarlet, but this time we're going to use the complementary color in this sap green, and it's going to give it this nice darker shade. We'll be using this color to outline the entire lock, but it's really concentrated on the shadow part of the thickness of the lock, and instead of creating a total shadow where the whole thickness part is dark, I like to make it a little bit light and dark in different spots. This is the perfect color to add shadow because it has that complementary color for the red and it's not a flat black. I'm using a very small brush to make the outline quite delicate, but this is where I accidentally put my palm into the wet paint and it smudged the paper. I tried to lift it with a damp brush. I tried to get as much possible as I could to get off, but I wasn't too worried about it because that's where my cast shadow is going to be, so it'll be covered. I diluted that color a little bit and then I'm going over the inner rim of the heart again and again softening it with a damp brush. I completely dried it before going in with my cast shadow, so I used that same color that I was using with the complementary red and green, and I just added some cerulean blue and it created this beautiful gray with an undertone of blue. I diluted it heavy and then just outlined my cast shadow and dropped in some color. So this is where I had that little smudge and I'm able to cover it with my cast shadow. I like making my cast shadow quite defined, but I don't like a harsh line. So even though it's quite a defined cast shadow, I'm still softening the edges. I'll keep layering this shadow closer to the lock and darkening as I go. When the paper gets too wet, I completely dry it before going in with my next layer. Because I had so many layers to this cast shadow, I had to dry it a few times. I'm putting the very darkest shade closest to the lock, but I'm still blending it out. Once I'm completely satisfied with my cast shadow, it's time to completely dry it with a hair dryer so that we can go in with our highlight. I'm using the bleed proof white and I'm using a very delicate small brush because I'm not adding too many highlights here, but the highlights that I do add are really going to make a difference. So I'm just going to add a highlight all the way around this gold part and then I'll smudge it out with a damp brush. In order to show that there is a protruding part on the front face of the lock, we're doing small highlights just around the rim and we're smudging it out with a damp brush. We're also adding a few little highlights on the gold portions of the lock and smudging it out, and then we're done. This is what it looks like in natural light. I hope you had fun painting with me, and I'll see you on the next one.